Simple is not easy. To say something is simple does not mean that it's easily done. To recognize that when you pray, you're talking to nobody but yourself. That's simple. For a whole lot of people, it's not easy. For a whole lot of people, there's a sentimental attachment to the idea that the universe was created by a kind, noble, infinitely intelligent spirit that cares about you. And to let go of that delusion, it may be simple, but it's not easy. Conversely, for those of us who have taken that step, for those of us who have figured it out and who have the detachment and self-confidence to really live with the ramifications, to really take it on board. Okay, everything my parents told me was a lie. Everything my grandparents told me was a lie. Quite possibly, if you went to a religious school, everything my school teachers told me was a lie. And to look back at the last 1,000 years of history and recognize the depth and scale of the deception and self-deception that's been going on, and recognize, wow, decade after decade, century after century, these lies have gone on and on. And here I am standing at the end of this process, having undeceived myself, but having enlightened myself, and my own father can't. I assume you sat down and talked to your father. He can't because he won't, or he won't because he can't. And now, are you going to start feeling that you're smarter than your own father? Are you going to start feeling that you're smarter than your own school teachers, your own university professors, maybe all of the authority figures you looked up to in your whole entire life? It's very easy for atheists to become in this way beguiled by a sense of their own specialness, their own extraordinariness, their own intellectual superiority over the people who matter to them most within their own family, within their own school, within their own social milieu. And yes, again, when you look back over the centuries, everyone else seems to think that Sir Isaac Newton was a very brilliant man. I don't think so. I think I'm smarter than Sir Isaac Newton. Have you seen what he has to say about religion? Have you seen what he has to say about the Bible? If you take some time to read Sir Isaac Newton's religious views, you might start feeling like a genius yourself, and that you're looking down at Sir Isaac Newton as a little teeny tiny intellectual ant compared to your enormity. So there's an ego trip here that atheists can get pulled into. You ever heard of Blaise Pascal? Brilliant mathematician. If you read what he has to say about religion, about God, about faith, you might start feeling that you are quite a bit more brilliant than Blaise Pascal. And it goes all the way back for centuries. All the great men celebrated in history, kings, queens, emperors, scientists, as I've mentioned. I mean, perhaps it's most extraordinary, perhaps it's least extraordinary. That includes scientists, explorers, all of these people, right? But the truth is, atheism remains simple, even if for 99% of people, it's not easy. It's not easy to accept. It's not easy to live with. And in fact, figuring out this one thing and really accepting it, that when you pray, nobody's listening to you. And let's just give one further illustration of what I mean by atheism in this context. Because we're really talking not just about atheism, but anti-religionism, if you like, because atheism can mean different things in different contexts. But here we really mean atheism specifically as one aspect of developing a hardened, disciplined attitude of opposing religion of all kinds. Not, for example, a form of atheism that embraces worshiping the ghosts of your deceased ancestors, because there are some religions within which you could be an atheist and nevertheless an utterly religious person. All your life, in the same way that people told you it was good to pray, you were probably told it was good to believe. The doctor may have given you medicine and told you how important it was to believe in the therapy, to believe in the treatment. And now, if you're really an atheist, if you're really a nihilist, say, what do you mean? Why do I have to believe in it? If it works, I don't have to believe in it. If toothpaste works, you as a doctor can hand it to someone and say, I don't give a fuck if you believe in this or not. It doesn't matter. If you believe this, nothing could matter to me less whether or not you believe in this, because I know the effects of toothpaste, and that's all there is to it. But very often, that's not the kind of scientific milieu we grow up in. We grow up being told, you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your teachers. You have to believe in studying for the test. You have to believe in trying your hardest. You have to believe in the medicine, believe in the therapy, believe in your father, believe in your little brother, believe in the army, believe in winning the war. We saw a sign today talking about praying for the soldiers in the current war that's being fought in 2022. Oh, prayer. Do you think that'll help? Believe, believe, believe. So it's one thing to take that step back and realize when you pray, you're talking to no one but yourself. Well, when you believe, what is it that you're doing exactly? That's simple. Okay. It's not easy. The problem is, though, as much as we may be inclined to start thinking of ourselves as intellectually extraordinary people, individually as atheists, or collectively, like however many thousand or however many million we add up to, the truth is atheists are not extraordinarily intelligent people. They're not. It would be very interesting to try to study, quantitatively measure, and qualitatively evaluate who are the atheists in any given society, who stands up to be counted as an atheist in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, in Ireland, in Italy, in New York City, and so on. And you probably could do some research and start to come to some conclusions about the type of person who in one context or another doesn't just passively become an atheist. But as I say, I'm really talking about becoming anti-religious rather than religious, with atheism being one component of those anti-clerical, anti-establishment attitudes. What kind of person does that? I'll tell you something. The 20th century was not a really long time ago. A whole lot of people who were atheists supported and made excuses for Joseph Stalin. How fucking stupid do you have to be in the 20th century to make excuses for and support Joseph Stalin? This set back the atheist movement by centuries. All right, think of the intellectual potential, the atheist movement, the way in which those people's individual lives were ruined by communism, and the way in which any possible atheist movement as a whole was really discredited by communism, right? Mao Zedong could repeat the same story, right? Now, even within Japan, I've studied this particular history. You can study the history of communism within Japan. So we're not talking about a Christian context, but a huge percentage of the people who stood up and said they represented a more rational, anti-religious, atheist future, they supported Joseph Stalin, they supported Mao Zedong, they supported communism. In some cases, they literally walked over the border to go join the Soviet Union, to go move to the atheist paradise, as they thought of it, because of the association between communism and atheism. Okay, so this thing, it's simple, but it's not easy, and it has this deceptive, dangerous quality of making us feel special, of making us feel empowered, of making us feel extraordinarily intelligent and well-informed, and we're not. All right. Look on YouTube. Jacqueline Glenn, the amazing atheist. All right, look at the guys who publish these books. Look at Sam Harris. All right. These are unbelievably stupid people. And I do get messages from you guys every so often. Probably someone's going to say it during this live stream. I get messages from people saying, hey, why don't you do a live stream with, Sam Harris? Why don't you do a podcast with Sam Harris? Why don't you do an interview with the amazing atheist? Like, no, okay, not Jacqueline Glenn. Nobody suggests that. But I do get messages. Oh, wow, there's Good. Moonin mentions armored skeptic. Wow. Wow, that guy's an idiot. Okay. They're incredibly stupid people here on YouTube. And they've made atheism almost their primary identity. All right. Their calling card, whatever you want to say. Their identity as an activist, their cause, Sorry, I was digressing from saying you may ask me, why don't you collaborate with these people, or why don't they collaborate with you? I think that is the reason why. I think Sam Harris, as accomplished as he is, as wealthy as he is, so on and so forth, I think he would be intimidated to talk to me about Buddhism, to talk to me about Hinduism, but quite possibly to talk to me about anything, about democracy in America, about any conceivable topic. I don't think Sam Harris is on my level. We own a couple of his books here. I did a book review. If you dig back on my channel, I did a review of one of his books years ago. We have another one of his books that we got for free. I don't have to hold it up. But, I just say it's not a completely uninformed opinion on my part. And I have made videos criticizing his position in detail. So let's stay on Sam Harris just to illustrate this point a step further. So the first example I gave you, and this is with all due humility and all due self-criticism, okay? I know what it's like to want to believe these things. I know what it's like to want to believe that there's a God. I know what it's like to want to believe in a religion without believing in a God. I've been through both, right? I was involved with Theravada Buddhism, really orthodox, philosophical, profound Theravada Buddhism, like the deep end of Buddhism, not the shallow hippie end of Buddhism, right? So I know what both of those are like. I know what it's like to want to believe in a religion with a God. I know what it's like to want to believe in a religion without a God, okay? My parents were communist fanatics, communist extremists, not moderate or ironical communists, So I know what it was like to kind of be forced to believe in communism by your parents and to try to get along with the family religion. You could talk about at exactly what age I started rebelling against that, or was seeing how crazy and nonsensical my parents' beliefs were, because for me, it was kind of perpetually falling apart. Anyway, and I was always very good at seeing my parents' weaknesses that way, seeing what it was, put it this way, seeing what it was they wanted to believe but couldn't believe themselves, seeing the brittleness of their own belief in communism and criticizing them for it and seeing how they react. So just over the dinner table, I already had this well-informed perspective that this ideology my parents were committed to wasn't entirely functional, even for them. Okay, if we think we're so brilliant, if we think we have some tremendous intellectual advantage over members of religion as atheists, if you were to do a survey in the United States of America right now in 2022, who has a higher rate of psychedelic drug use? I'm gonna narrow that question down. Who believes in LSD? Atheists or religious people? Who has a higher rate of not just using LSD, but believing in LSD? Who has a higher rate of using ayahuasca and believing in ayahuasca, right? And we can go through a long list of, from my perspective, crazy hippie spiritual beliefs. I was just spiritual, crazy pseudoscientific beliefs. And you are going to find the atheists are just as desperate to believe in them as members of mainstream religions, or that they're more desperate to believe in them, that for some reason Christians, Muslims, and Jews aren't reaching out for LSD. They aren't reaching out for ayahuasca in the same way that atheists are. And admittedly, these are minority persuasions we're talking about. It's not the case that LSD has an enormous cult following in the United States of America, but it's significant. The people who really believe in, however you want to put this, psychedelic drug use, psychedelic drug therapy, so on and so forth. Now, we can go through a number of other things. You might think faith healing is only associated with the religious to a remarkable extent. It's associated with atheists. You can go through all these, beliefs that people cling to. And, one I'm open-minded about. Who has more belief in antidepressants, in psychiatric drugs. We just had mentioned here, Moonin mentioned Armored Skeptic. So years ago, I made a video criticizing him on exactly this issue. He identifies as a skeptic. What he says about antidepressants, Prozac, SSRI drugs, these types of drugs, there's no skepticism in it. He's dogmatic in the truest sense, where he is a believer. He believes in these thought-terminating cliches. Trust your doctor. Ask your doctor for help. Trust your doctor. Your quote unquote, your mind has a chemical imbalance. You know what I mean? All this crap. And you see how thin their commitment to skepticism is. And you see how, the fact that they had some quality in them that let them, let go of their attachment to prayer, let them let go of their belief in a creator God, that the world is some divine plan. They had something to let them do that, right? And yet they're still clinging to all of these other beliefs, including, quite likely, Prozac, if not LSD. They want to believe in drugs. They want to believe in science. But their idea of science really is a kind of religion. It's at best pseudoscience. They have religious attitudes that show up in other parts of their lives. Now, what I'm about to say to you, some of you will find this hard to visualize, and some of you know right away what I'm talking about. Have you known anyone who was an atheist, who was an anti-religious, anti-clerical atheist? Someone was an atheist and rejected organized religion thoroughly, and who hated black people? Have you known someone who was an atheist and for no religious reason whatsoever, they hated homosexuals? Now, I'm going to just narrow in to put a human face on it. Let's say you knew someone and you considered them a highly intelligent person with modern atheist values, but they were specifically racist when it came to miscegenation, meaning people getting married and having children who are from different races. Have you known a Black American woman who intensely hated Black women who married white men? Oh, now it has a human face. Now, before we were talking about racism as an abstract concept. Now we're talking about a particular person with a particular kind of experience in life. And they will often say to you in a self-effacing way, well, look, this is just my experience. When I was going through college, all of the girls who, they're going to have whatever justification for it, but that can be a really intensely felt racism. And it may be based on jealousy. It may be based on supernatural beliefs. So here's an example I've seen up close and personal. Have you ever met a white woman living in Asia who intensely hates white men who choose to be with Asian women rather than, for example, being with her? These are examples of racism. Now, I could go on and on. Have you met Chinese people who are racist against Mongolians? Have you met Cambodian people who are racist against Vietnamese people? So my point is, it's very easy to presume that atheists and the people who, in an extraordinary way, with real daring, stand up to their own parents and say, no, this is wrong. And in a sense, they turn around and look back at the last 1,000 years, and they're willing to accept this whole period of millennia, but at least 1,000 years. This is all error. This is all wrong. It might be very beguiling to think these people are extraordinarily intelligent. There's something really excellent about these people. Now, I would make the claim that the most intelligent people in every society will question, will challenge, will overturn the lies that society is predicated upon. All right? So the foundational myths, the mythology, the lies that created and perpetuated and sustained the society they're born into, the most intelligent people will question those things, will challenge them, will overturn them. All right? I don't know how someone can be born and raised in the United States of America and not question what they were taught in school about the American Revolution. But this is typical. All these people who think they're brilliant, they will point their finger and say, look at those Russians. All they hear is propaganda from Vladimir Putin. They never question it. Isn't this pathetic? Look at these Russians who only hear one side of the story. Oh, I'm sorry. Have you read anything written by British United Empire loyalists? Have you read one pamphlet, one lecture? Have you read the perspective of just one person who argued that the American independence movement was wrong? No, 99.9% of Americans have never done this. Even people with PhDs. They've never thought, it's possible that when Thomas Paine was writing a propaganda pamphlet in the middle of a civil war, he might have been a little bit dishonest or misleading in what is overtly a work of propaganda. Let me just ask you, does it take a genius? Who is going to question this? Who is going to, again, regardless of what the lies are, the lies that created the society you're in, that promulgated, promoted, sustained, the social norms, etc. What kind of person in France questions the myth of Napoleon? I don't think I have to go into details there, but I think you're aware. Napoleon is presented as this great hero. You start asking questions. You start looking under rocks. Have any of them read the perspective of just one person who was anti-Napoleon from whichever perspective? Have you thought about it that way? And there isn't just one perspective. There isn't just, sorry, I should stay with the American Revolution for 1 second. There isn't just one perspective from which the American Revolution should be cross-examined and criticized. So I just mentioned the British, basically the royalist position, the people who were loyal to the King of England. Okay, that's one perspective. Okay, what about black people? Did they have a perspective? What about Mexican people in the Spanish Empire? Did they have a perspective? What about First Nations and Indigenous people? Did they have a perspective? What about Roman Catholics in Quebec? We can keep going here, right? What about people? So here's an interesting one. I have a couple books on this. What about people who really wanted democracy? That's another interesting part. What about people who didn't support the American Constitution because it wasn't democratic enough, or they argued it wasn't democratic at all? That's an interesting perspective. I've done that reading. I'm sorry, but 99.9% of Americans, they've never even imagined that perspective exists. Oh, what? There were people who said the American Revolution and the Constitution, that it's really not democratic. There were people who actually kept fighting after the revolution ended, because from their perspective, they said the revolution isn't over yet. We haven't won yet. We don't have democracy yet. Did you know that? This is one example. And of course, religion is an important part of that history, but I've intentionally used what's thought of as a non-religious example. So yeah, I do think the most intelligent people in any society, the dissident intellectuals, they have to question the lies that society is predicated upon. And religion is just one kind of lie. It may not be the only lie. It may not be the most important lie we are living. If you are born and raised in Beijing, China, there are a whole lot of lies for you to question that have created and sustained the regime in communist China. And religion is relatively low on the list. Religion's part of it too. But religion isn't as important in that critique in China as it would be if you were born in Syria, if you were born in even Iraq. This democracy, have in Iraq, right? Imagine someone who was born in Iraq just 10 years ago and what they're growing up with, being told about the difference between Sunni and Shiite, and how much that matters to everyone in their family, how much it matters in the newspaper, contemporary politics. You're growing up right now in Iraq. Imagine what it takes to really recognize this is all bullshit. And it's been bullshit for 1,000 years, and it's still bullshit now. Okay. So in coming to the title of this video and the thesis of this video, it's a fairly concise question I want to examine here. All right. You could have a very shallow and catty approach to this catchphrase, this thought terminating cliche, that quote, you're free to believe whatever you want to believe. I'm not going to talk about it in a shallow and catty way. I want to talk about it in a way that's really profound. And I want to deal with the genealogy of the concept, by which I really mean its origin in one generation and how it changed from generation to generation over time. What does it mean to believe in freedom of religion? What does it mean to believe in freedom of conscience? right? What does it mean to believe in freedom of belief? Does it really mean, oh, you can believe whatever you want to believe? And obviously, already in the title of this video, I'm suggesting to you, if you just stop and reflect on it for one moment, you can recognize nobody believes that. In our society, in our world, in this dimension, in this reality, nobody believes that you can and should believe whatever you want to believe. It's never sincere. So why do we all say it? How has that become one of the foundational myths in our society? Why has it become one of the underpinning, big lies that our society is built upon? Okay. Now, the origin of the concept, right? Freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of belief, was very simply and very cynically an attack on the Catholic Church. In Europe, the way we arrived at our current set of pluralistic political and religious assumptions was by people assailing and criticizing the Catholic Church and saying people should have freedom of belief, freedom of conscience. And what that really meant in that period, and this begins when Martin Luther is alive, right? So you guys may not know this. At one point, Martin Luther is in the same city as the emperor of Europe, as he called himself. It's an interesting thing. At some periods of time, there's someone calling himself emperor, and sometimes there isn't. This is not a king, but an emperor. And that emperor had the ability to kill, at that moment, Martin Luther. And the whole history of the world would be different if he'd done it. Should he kill Martin Luther? Should he exercise some kind of clemency or detachment? So obviously, you guys know the decision was made not to kill Martin Luther. And the emperor, I'm sorry, his name is escaping my mind right now. He published his own philosophical statement in defense of orthodoxy, in defense of the Catholic Church. And from what I know, it was basically ignored. Martin Luther's publications of that time, they were wildly popular, that he ended up kind of defining the debate that ensued over the reform of the Catholic Church. So as you know, these things happen simultaneously. Some people broke away and founded Protestantism, but other people took the same impulse and just tried to reinvigorate the Catholic Church, rid it of its forms of corruption or what have you. So the original meaning of this kind of idiom, you should have freedom of belief, freedom of conscience, right? The first step of it was simply to try to tolerate Protestantism within Catholic Europe. The second step, here I get to use a catchphrase from 2015. Ain't no fun when the rabbits got the gun. The second step was to try to protect Catholics against prosecution from Protestants, right? So both happened, although not quite simultaneously. Soon enough, it wasn't just the fact that Catholics were persecuting, I should say, oppressing, whatever you want to say, Protestants. Actually, you had scenarios where instead it was the Protestants persecuting and oppressing Catholics. Quite soon, I think Switzerland is the first place this happened. You had one Protestant sect mercilessly persecuting and oppressing another Protestant sect, just over doctrinal differences of that kind. Okay, so this is step two, all right? Quote unquote tolerance. Now, yes, thank you, Charles V. I didn't want to get the number wrong. Yeah. Thanks, guys. So the so-called emperor of Europe at that time, and you guys can look at a map of what he was and wasn't emperor of. He did not obviously rule all of Europe. That was Charles V, right? Charles V, I think, is much underrated today in his historical significance, but it's topic for another video. Anyway, so step two, it's very clear what we mean then. And obviously, within England, of course, as you know, there were, periods of time when really Catholics were this persecuted and oppressed minority. Okay. And then step three, and this has changed our understanding of freedom of belief, freedom of conscience still this day, right, was the Quakers. Because now you got to tolerate people who don't want to fight in your army. Now you got to tolerate people who don't want to pay taxes, at least in time of war. They don't want to support the military, this kind of thing. You have people who are conscientious objectors and they're an organized religious group. So the fear about Catholics, very understandably, was when you had a war between Protestant and Catholic, the Catholics were going to fight on the Catholic side and the Protestants were going to fight on the Protestant side. That was generally the case. I mean, this wasn't some kind of baseless fear. It was that there were many, many contexts in which, religion mattered more than nationality. And in the complex alliances within Europe, when England and Spain and France and the different bits and pieces of Germany and Italy were all at war with each other, well, a lot of times, this kind of fear that the Catholics would be on the Catholic side proved to be true. So, the basic question is, could you have a form of nationalism, national identity that was more powerful than the division between Catholic and Protestant and would incorporate them both into one army and into one tax-paying public? Oh, but then, the Quakers, more than anyone else, proved the point that everyone in this audience will say the doctrinal differences between these groups are not worth fighting and dying over. They're not even worth reading a Wikipedia article over. How many of you have ever read even one Wikipedia article about what the difference is between Quakers and Protestants? How many? They didn't wear buttons. They were identifiable by not having buttons. I kid you not, the Quakers. They were very proud of this. They had a distinctive style of dress that came out of their ideology. How different were the Quakers from the Puritans? How different are Protestants from Catholics or Episcopalians from Lutherans? Get into these. Everyone in my audience today will say, well, this isn't worth fighting for, and so on and so forth. Okay? My point is, those trivial differences just a few centuries ago, they didn't just matter. They totally consumed the body politic. They totally overwhelmed the parliaments of England and the 13 colonies, for example. And in any given period, like within France, Catholic versus Protestant. Again, France is a defined country. Germany is much harder to generalize about because it's a whole bunch of different duchies and countries and so on. Again, Switzerland has its own story here with Zwingli and so on. Okay, this was not a footnote in the history of Europe. This was a totally overwhelming, all-consuming problem. And the hope was, the prayer was, you might say, that we could overcome this through freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of belief. And anyone here right now can say, yeah, but all you're talking about is the difference between two religions so similar that from the perspective of a Japanese tourist, they would be identical. Like in the year 1750, if you have someone come from Japan to Europe, they'd say, well, all these people are killing each other and I don't get it. Like, well, okay, I've been to a Catholic wedding and I've been to a Protestant wedding. I've been to a Catholic funeral. I've been to a Protestant funeral. What do you got? How is this, how is this worth fighting and dying over? I'm using Japan as an example, but you may or may not know this. In the same period, religions within Japan were unbelievably heterogeneous. You can talk, Japanese animism, how much consistency is there from one river valley to the next river valley in Japan for what they call religion? You can call it Shintoism. You can use one noun to describe it. But this incredible diversity in this. You want to talk about Buddhism. Buddhism is a very loose concept for what's going on in Japan at that time. And you could say to some extent now. But anyway, Melissa and I have talked about this a lot with the history of China. It's like, look, people talk about Taoism like it's one thing. The amount of diversity and heterogeneousness incorporated within a category like Taoism, like Confucianism, like legalism, even so-called legalism, so on and so forth. These are, there's no comparison to how orthodox and strictly defined Catholicism is. And then, frankly, how each one of the flavors of Protestantism defined itself so narrowly and hated and despised all the others. So that was the original concept here, right? Now, I always find it's sufficient for me to just say this to you guys verbally. I can gesture with my hands and not to provide you with an actual three-dimensional chart or computer-generated image or graphic. So it's up to you. You can look at the screen now, or you can close your eyes and imagine along with me as I describe to you the following diagram. I want you to imagine a very large circle representing facts. So our first circle is facts, the universe of facts, of things that are merely true, whether or not you perceive them to be true, whether you care about them or you're indifferent to them or what have you. And within this, there is a much smaller circle, which I'm going to call interpretations. And the second circle is entirely within the first circle, right? So there's a subset of facts that are your interpretations of facts, right? And already you can imagine your interpretations of facts are not quite the same as mine. Your interpretations of facts are not quite the same as your own brothers, your own sisters, your own parents, your own grandparents. Now, within this second circle, there is a smaller circle, completely encompassed by the first and second circles, right? And that circle is opinions. So there are facts, there are your interpretations of facts, and then there are your opinions, which are on the basis of your interpretation of facts, and so on. And now the final circle in this diagram, which is the smallest of all, there's a little teeny tiny circle nestled within your opinions, and that is the circle of beliefs. Okay? There are things you believe. What do you believe? You believe in opinions. Opinions that exist on the basis of your interpretation of facts. Facts that exist. And then the interpretations in turn are on the basis of actually existing facts that you may or may not, may disregard, may ignore at your liberty, right? If someone were to say to you today, as many people do, oh, you can believe whatever you want to believe. It's the exact opposite of the truth, isn't it? Are you allowed to believe that your daughter will live a happier life if you have an arranged marriage for her? Are you allowed to believe that the best possible life your daughter can have is to be taken out of school as soon as possible, to never complete high school, never go to university, never have a career, and to be married to a man selected by her parents, her grandparents, her aunts or uncle, right? Are you free to believe that? Do you think other people should be free to believe that? And this is a really difficult one to talk about, because if you're willing to say, no, I think we should coerce people into not doing that with their daughters, right? The methods of coercion become quite difficult to pin down. Now, this is the year 2022. Have you ever heard, ever in, say, a newspaper article, a radio report, have you ever heard police this week presented evidence from the text messages and emails of the parents and grandparents proving that this girl was forced into an arranged marriage, that they'd selected her husband, that wasn't her? Would it be harder to prove that someone was the victim of an arranged marriage, put it that way? Would that be harder to prove than proving that someone's a drug dealer through text messages, emails, these kinds of communications, right? Now, as you may know, most countries now have laws against child brides. They have laws against arranging a marriage below a certain age, but you might be shocked at just how low the age is, just how young someone has to be for it to be treated as a crime in this way. Okay. Do you think it's acceptable for the family to take a girl out of education and have an arranged marriage, which, by the way, culturally, it may be bought and paid for. It may be a lot closer to prostitution than you want to think it is. Maybe paid for. Do you think that's acceptable when a girl is 14, 16, 18? I don't think it's acceptable when a woman is 22, 24, 26. I don't think it's acceptable under any heading, right? But what we're getting at here is something quite subtle, quite difficult to enforce, and that nobody in the last 200 years has wanted want to deal with, right? Again, I've never heard any instance of this. Now, this paradigm, arranged marriage, what religion were you picturing is the problem here? I'm going to accuse you of being prejudiced and say you were probably picturing Muslim families, don't you? Well, I'm going to name a few other religions that have a problem with arranged marriage. Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Mormonism. It's not just Islam. Remarkably, this authoritarian patriarchal pattern of how women are treated, it's recurred amongst basically all of the most popular religions in the world. Now, it is true if you were to say, okay, how many Buddhists today take this seriously and practice this way, as opposed to how many Muslims? I'm not claiming these religions are all equal. Is this as big a problem even in Judaism as it is in Islam? No doubt. There's a huge difference between the extent of this problem in Judaism and Christianity as opposed to Islam. Hinduism, pretty interesting example, guys. You might want to do some research about child marriage in Hinduism, arranged marriage in Hinduism, so on and so forth. Have you ever once heard about a trial where people anywhere in the world where the parents were brought in and accused of arranged marriage, and the parents said, whoa, come on. My daughter is pretty ugly, and I was just trying to help introduce her to some men that she might be, the choice was hers. This is what you'd have to get into if you were going to enforce a law against this, right? Some people would be accused of engaging in arranged marriage, and they try to defend themselves. Like, oh, no, I was just just encouraging my daughter to go on a date with this guy and give him a chance. I wasn't, the choice was hers. I wasn't making the decision for her. I didn't actually auction off her virginity. I didn't actually sell her as a bride or something, right? What exactly are the definitions? Where does it start and stop? How do you even coercively change a culture that way? Again, sorry, maybe you guys have heard this anywhere in the world. And so someone here mentions Hasidism. Yes. So I was indicating that. So within Judaism, this exists. Don't get me wrong. It does. I'm saying that explicitly. This does exist within Judaism. It does exist in Christianity. It does exist within Mormonism. It does exist in Buddhism. It does. But yes, I mean, what percentage of Jewish families are implicated in this cultural pattern today? It's certainly less extent. The scale and depth and extent of it, sure. There's a reason why people by default probably are picturing this as a Muslim problem. Some people, depending on your background, you might have thought of it as a Hindu problem. Okay, here's the question I want to ask you. I opened this video by really explaining to you at some length that we are not angels by virtue of being atheist. We're not extraordinarily intelligent. We're not even well informed. This is something simple, but not necessarily easy to do. It brings us together. We have in common as atheists. How many people, if they were raised as secular atheists with modern scientific values, how many would reinvent the wheel? How many would devise a system of oppressive patriarchy involving arranged marriage and child marriage? Now, I am not going to say to you that zero atheists would do this. I would say incredibly stupid, incredibly evil people would do this in the absence of religion. But in the presence of religion, you can be in a society where the vast majority of people are doing, where it's a mass phenomenon, where it's the default culturally accepted behavior. That's what's so extraordinary about religion. So I can repeat this now very briefly with circumcision. All right? How many people, if they were born with secular, atheist, anti-religious, anti-clerical, modern attitudes, how many people would get the idea, you know what? I need some kind of coming of age ceremony. I need some way to mark the difference between being a boy and a man. It's just paying a surgeon to cut off part of my penis, to remove 60% of the nerve endings in my penis. Can you imagine someone in the absence of religion deciding to do this? deciding to mark the difference between childhood and manhood by undergoing circumcision. An incredibly small number of atheists, incredibly stupid or incredibly evil, could do this to themselves or could do this to their own sons, right? But the power of religion is that it makes it the unquestioned default throughout society. Now, I can say the same about eating meat. I can say the same about animal sacrifice. I can say the same about drinking alcohol. It seems that there is no evil that cannot be rationalized and popularized and take on coercive force through religion. And although, I dutifully opened this video by criticizing my own side and pointing to the fact that atheists are fallible, right? We now live in a world where we have to question, right? We have to question the extent to which we could make progress just by pulling people back from this tiny circle of beliefs, from living within the sphere of belief and perceiving what's in that sphere as more real than any fact. To instead pull them back to recognizing these are merely my opinions. And these opinions are based on a finite and imperfect set of interpretations of a finite and imperfect selection of facts. That's the breakthrough we're capable of as a human species. The vast majority of people can't live without beliefs, but they can learn to regard those beliefs as nothing but opinions they happen to be especially passionate about. They can learn to, in this sense, undermine or overcome belief and to not have dogmatic attitudes, to not have religious attitudes about anything in their lives. It's a tremendously important form of progress. And even if we acknowledge atheists can become communists, and it happened on a huge scale. Atheists can be racist. Atheists can be homophobic. Atheists can be terrible people in myriad ways. Nevertheless, right, I don't think I'm being optimistic when I say that atheists cannot reinvent the darkness of the Dark Ages. Atheists will not revert to arranged marriage, child marriage, circumcision, so on and so forth. We live in a society now that, as a kind of echo or an inheritance of the internecine wars between Catholic and Protestant, right, dogmatically asserts this notion of freedom of religion, freedom of belief. So much so that we say when China puts Muslims into a re-education camp, that it's a crime against humanity. Okay, I want to talk to you about camps for just 1 second here. I've talked about camps on the channel before. When Christians in the United States of America have a gay son or a lesbian daughter, what do those Christians do? Try to force their kids to become straight acting, heteronormative. They send them to a camp. They send them to a re-education camp. And we don't seem to regard this as a violation of their human rights. We seem to regard religion as something innate and inalienable when it suits us. That prejudice against religion, it's treated like prejudice against a skin color and is therefore taboo and bad and evil and wrong, right? How do Mormons ensure that their kids grow up as good little Mormons? How do Lutherans ensure that their kids grow up as good little Lutherans? They send them to a camp. They send them to Bible camp. They send them to brainwashing camp. And I have made YouTube videos in the past showing you what these camps look like, and it's horrifying. Even the Catholic ones. when I was putting together those video clips, looking at all these different religious camps, I was expecting the Catholic camps to be less horrifying. I thought, well, come on, the Catholics don't take this stuff seriously. The Catholic camps were arguably the most horrifying of all. It was unbelievable. The indoctrination, the brainwashing, the real ritual inculcation of belief and superstition and irrationality and stupidity into children, one generation after another, in camps. Yes, to some extent, this happens in schools every day if your kid goes to a Catholic school. But I think there is something especially tangible. Like, it's not just symbolic, the significance of these camps. It gives you a really tangible way to visualize what this process is of one generation bullying another to come into conformity with their fundamentally stupid, ignorant, evil, and wrong preconceptions. And to hold on to these beliefs and to think that those beliefs are more real than facts, that they don't come from a human being's interpretations and opinions, but that they've been handed down by God or materialized magically, so on and so forth. Now, when I was a kid, I saw my own family tear itself apart over Israel, the politics of Israel. Totally bitter, vicious hatred between people in my families because they're different positions on Israel. This relates to many different things in this video, even though everyone involved was an atheist. We were people who were Jewish as an ethnic category, but all these people in these bitterly contested discussions and people who didn't talk to each other for years and hated each other and all this stuff, and over Israel, over Israeli politics. You know what Jewish families do to try to ensure that their kids grow up Zionist, meaning pro-Israel? They send them to a camp. And I met and I talked to kids who told me how thrilled they were to use a machine gun at that camp. You take a little kid who's played video games, you say, hey, back then, the number one most popular gun in video games and comic books and stuff, it was just the gun that people thought was cool. It was called the Uzi. I don't know if you know this, U-Z-I. Man, there's a rapper recently with that nickname. It's a little bit old hat now. It's an Israeli gun, guys. You may not know this. It's the Israeli army. That's where you learn how to use an Uzi. So you take a kid, and in America too, I mean, each state's a little bit different, but kids are already shooting hunting rifles at age 12 and stuff. 12, 14, from state to state, kids are using guns with adult supervision. You take a kid and you put a gun in their hand and you show them what it's like to fire an Uzi. And then they literally go home and watch cartoons, like superhero cartoons, and they read comic books, and they see that gun and they see it in action movies too, Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, whatever's popular at the time. They know what it's like to hold that gun and hear and feel the bullets coming out of it. Okay, God isn't real. Or that power trip is. This really influences little kids. All right, and I'm sure we could talk about this under other headings. I know there are families that they want their son to be a hunter because the father and grandfather was, and they go and they hold a gun and they shoot a deer, whatever it may be. I remember one guy. He was Jewish. To me, he didn't look Jewish. I was surprised when I found he was Jewish. I remember he started telling me about the peculiar rush he felt when firing tracer bullets. So these are bullets that have phosphorus in them, so that when you fire the bullet, normally a bullet travels a bit faster than the human eye can really see. Zip, you get to see this illuminated trace, this trail behind it. So you can see exactly the angle you fired the bullet at. So you can imagine this is useful for improving your aim. This is a kid who knows what it's like to hold fire a gun. And to be told, what are they told? You were born special. One of God's chosen people. All right. Muslims are putting their kids into camps. All right. Christians are putting their kids into camps. Mormons are putting their kids into camps. Hindus are putting their kids into camps. You guys might not have seen this. I did. Have you seen the videos about some of those Ukrainian camps? Some of those right-wing Ukrainian camps. All right. There are a lot of people organizing camps. All right. So what is it exactly that we are today criticizing China for? What is it exactly that China is doing wrong in Xinjiang? And how long is it going to be before we make hypocrites of ourselves by doing approximately or exactly the same thing? I'm going to pause. Guys, it's now 55 minutes. I could do a mic drop right now. Melissa's been sitting off camera. I want to give Melissa a chance to chit chat with me. If you want to, you can sit down. If you want to, you can ask a question. If any of you in the audience have anything tremendously intelligent to say, you can say it now, and I'll pay more attention, more attention than usual. There have been some comments here I can reply to from the last hour. Now look, different levels to this thing. So Melissa's, I can see she's rubbing the sticks together to come up with a spark. There's no pressure on you. You can say anything. You could say nothing. What do people mean when they say you can believe anything you want? All right. What do people mean? Today, in the 21st century, all they mean is that they don't give a fuck about you, that they don't care. Like, if someone is vegan and they say to you as a meat eater, hey, you can believe whatever the fuck you want, it's real like saying you can go to hell. Like, I don't care about you. Doesn't mean they don't care about the animals you're killing. Doesn't mean they don't care about the damage you're doing to the climate. Doesn't mean they don't care about heart attacks and all the terrible diseases that come. There are a whole lot of things they care about, but not you. You can go fuck yourself. That's what it means when people say you can believe whatever you want to believe in the 21st century. But what's interesting is that is the final and most degenerate form of an idea that just a few generations ago meant something very different. What it meant was that in the autobiography of Ben Franklin, that he took really seriously the fact that he was in a colony where he had to get Catholics and Protestants to work together in fighting against Spain and fighting against France and fighting against, quote unquote, the Indians, i.e. Native Americans, and that he had to take really seriously and manage his relations with the Quakers, which you can read about. You can read it from his perspective. That was his idea of a society, was with that kind of pluralism. And when they said you can believe whatever you want to believe, you have freedom of conscience, etc., all they really meant was there's just enough tolerance here that we're not going back to the way things were under Charles V, Emperor of Europe, the way things were before the Protestant Reformation, that there's this way forward to have a little bit of wiggle room and enlightenment. Did they have any tolerance for the religion of the indigenous American people? No, none, zero. Did they have any tolerance for the religions of the African people who still had their own religion when they came over? No, none, zero. It was this very limited range of tolerance. And what I'm inviting you guys to think about a little bit is how limited the range of tolerance is in our times also, if we're really being honest about it. Again, very briefly with tolerance. I don't see any reason why we should tolerate circumcision, male or female. What is the argument in favor of tolerance of that? And again, I'm being honest with you guys here. This, what I'm about to say, is even more unpopular. That's already an unpopular. I don't see any reason to tolerate gambling. I just don't see the benefit of letting people lose their money gambling at a casino. The vast majority of people disagree with me. I realize what I'm saying here is unpopular. There are some evils that there's a point in tolerating. To give an example, I really take this seriously now. We've been through this for years together, guys. You've been watching my channel. Okay. There is a reason to tolerate racism. If you don't let people say what they really think on Twitter and on YouTube and on, like, how are we supposed to make progress when you silence and censor the racists, right? Like that, I've seen that freedom of speech come and go on the internet. I was myself attacked by racists and anti-Semites, whatever. I'm ethnically Jewish. I've really endured that. But like, I'm just saying, you can't say there's no point in allowing racist people to have freedom of speech. There is a point. There is a benefit. But some kinds of tolerance, right? What are we tolerating? Yo, you want to come over?
Yeah, sure. I was thinking of an example that you've actually already made videos about, so it's
Good.
something that was on my mind as we were talking about this, because it's not in every religion. At least I've never heard about it in Hinduism or Buddhism, but it is in certain religions, the problem of cousin marriage.
Yes.
And interbreeding. Inbreeding.
Yeah.
That this is a real significant problem. I saw some video from a countryside in Turkey, in the country of Turkey, where a family of the husband and wife were cousins, and some of the children turned out okay, but some turned out horribly deformed and with severe mental disabilities, severely retarded. So this is a extreme, example. But in any case, this should be banned. This should be outlawed. There should be no tolerance for this. So at what point, do you say that this is completely intolerable?
And who gets to say, so babe, I thought about that in my earlier monologue or discussion under a different heading. So this isn't disagreeing with you. It's just putting in a different context. When I mentioned, for example, a black woman who is racist against couples that intermarry, so mixed race couples, where that's the peculiar form of bigotry is specific, not racism in general, but specifically hostility to miscegenation, or Asian men and white women, or white men and Asian women, that specific form of racism. What's interesting about that is that if you have scientific attitudes, you understand that the real problem is inbreeding. Scientifically, inbreeding is a problem. Scientifically, marrying your cousin is a problem. And I'm not saying that exoticized foreigners, that's necessarily the best person you can marry. You got to make decisions in particular cases. But if you are attracted to people who are exotic, estranged to you, there is that reassurance. At least you're not marrying your own cousin. At least you're not gonna, you're not gonna have these problems of inbreeding. So that is one where you can't say science is neutral or science is indifferent. Science is fundamentally in favor of,
it's like the toothpaste example, where there's just, it doesn't matter if you believe in inbreeding being good or bad. It's scientifically, it's bad. So
right. Quick, but to be fair, in the year 1950, still, most people believed in eugenics, and they believed that science proved the opposite, right? And the World War II period and so on. But even you go back to, say, the 1890s, which is very much the lead up ideologically to World War II, there was this whole blossoming pseudoscience of eugenics that was regarded as scientific certainty, that basically, kind of justified not just racism, also a lot of classism. A lot of it was kind of hating on poor people, as if poor people are genetically inferior and this kind of thing, and breeding between the classes, aristocratic attitudes about marriage and breeding. Oh, and aristocratic attitudes that also links to arranged marriage and these things. And just to kind of prescribe one cure to many ailments, because we talk about different manifestations of religious mentality here. But what if you could have the detachment to regard your beliefs as just a kind of opinion that you're especially for all of them, for all the examples, whether it's racism or homophobia or inbreeding or toothpaste, like what if and that's the difference. Well, I came to the difference between us and them. Well, that's the difference between me and them. As a member of the audience, you have to ask yourself if you've really got this kind of radical skepticism in common with me or not.
I liked this this example or this demonstration that you made with the different series of circles that interlock. You know, I heard an interview recently with a woman who had 10 children, and part of her reasoning was, I never want anyone to tell me how many children I can have, you know, and you can listen to other women who have had so many children, and, you know, they deal with a lot of prejudice from people around them. They think, you know,
you're a redneck, you're a bumpkin, this kind of
right.
stuff.
And in a sense, how is it possible to provide the appropriate level of child rearing for that many children? It's hard to believe that any woman can really give a good upbringing to 10 children. But still, you know, at a certain point, you know, at what point does it become irresponsible? And usually it has to do with religion. I mean, typically, religious households have more children. So yeah, this is also a factor with I mean, us being vegan, I know overpopulation is not really the problem. We know that if everybody had a vegan diet, the planet could sustain a population of over 7 billion people. But given that most people are not vegan, most people are consuming meat, overpopulation is a problem, and it's going to destroy the planet. If everybody continues eating the diet that they are.
Okay, you want to go back to your seat?
Sure.
I'll just say, you know, I could only use so many examples in a 1 hour monologue, but, you know, when I choose that kind of example, when you talk about the situation of a woman who is being put into an arranged marriage and having kids and is not even completing high school and not going to university and can't have some other career. Sure, overpopulation is a factor, and these things can be talked about. But, you know, for me, this is about the meaning of life. And again, you know, if anyone disagrees, come at me, bro. But I do not think a woman can have a meaningful life who has an arranged marriage at age 14. And there were people who have an arranged marriage earlier than 14. There are. And again, if you just go back a few centuries in Europe, it wasn't that common, but it existed. There was a certain percentage of marriages were, you know, this type of arranged marriage at a shockingly early age. You can read the autobiographies of people who went through it. You know, even if it were theoretically possible for a woman who wears a veil and who has an arranged marriage and who drops out of school, theoretically, she can still read Thucydides. She can still read Herodotus. Theoretically, she can still develop her intellect and so on. But, you know, this is as ridiculous as saying that a person could be put in prison at age 14, like someone who's falsely accused of murder and put in prison at 14, which happens, and they could still have a wonderful life. You know, well, yes, you could, you know, theoretically your life in prison could have been better than your life outside of prison. But this kind of theorizing, you know, it fails to rationalize, it fails to justify what we are looking at, which is fundamentally snuffing out a human being's intellectual potential, snuffing out the possibility that they'll have a meaningful life. Now, the counter argument, which I take seriously, a lot of people would just dismiss it, is, well, if you give women freedom, if you let them wait to get married till they're 35 years old or whenever they choose to, which may be 35 years old, you know, if you give women all of these freedoms, well, what percentage of them are going to become strippers? What percentage of them are going to be on OnlyFans and so on? A lot, you know, like a lot. Like, you know, I said in response to a comment from the audience recently, someone was talking about social harmony. I don't think harmony is the purpose of society. I don't think having a peaceful society is really what I want. You know, the Taliban create and sustain a harmonious society. That doesn't really interest me. You know, it is true, if you give women this kind of freedom, there will be many broken hearts and many bad decisions made, and women will make particular types of decisions that would be impossible for them to make in a more repressive society, where instead they're sold off as they have arranged marriage and so on and so forth. It certainly does, you know, change the nature of those things. And I think it's important to accept, you know, like, I know it seems ridiculous, but you can really say democracy entails pornography, Like, you can't have one without the other. When you have democracy, you have political equality for women and freedom and opportunity, some women are going to get involved with pornography, whether that's OnlyFans or magazines or what have you. So, and some women are going to prostitute themselves, even in the most idealized egalitarian future you can conceptualize. So I'm just saying, I don't dismiss that in a catty way, but I'm making my argument not on the basis. It's a totally good point, by the way, overpopulation and what that entails. And by the way, guys, the demographics are very well traced for the modern state of Israel. How many children do conservative Jews have, and the different definitions of how conservative, and how many children do people with modern secular attitudes have, whether they identify as atheist or as Reform Jewish or one of the more liberal and libertine sects. Yeah, guess what? It's pretty consistent. The religious maniacs, the women get married younger, they have lower levels of education, they have more children, and year by year, the percentage of Israel that is comprised of so-called Haredi Jewish people. And again, you can get into what is the exact definition of Orthodox and Haredi, but the percentage of Israelis who are religious fanatics, it is increasing. Just say the people who are more free-thinking and secular modern, they're having fewer children. So anyway, an extreme example of that. Oh, sorry, you want to come up? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just say it. I mean, another thing. Sorry,
Go
I'll just add another thing that woman said was, if one room in my house is lit by one light bulb, it doesn't matter how many people are in the room, it's still the same light bulb. So that is her belief. Like, she's like, it was such a reduction. Yeah, it was just so silly, because she had just gotten done talking about how much food the whole family ate, having 10 children. It's ridiculous. Like, yeah. So you may have this belief based off of an opinion about...
At some point, there were so many people in the room that I am in someone else's shadow. That is my refutation.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you know the quiverful movement?
I think you've told me about it.
Quiverful, yeah. It's just an easy one to Google. It's not that popular a religious segment, but there are religious people who believe in having the greatest number of children possible. Okay. And I think that's a great example of how religion just immediately destroys any possibility of a meaningful life for at least the woman and her daughters. How meaningful a life the men can have, it's just less oppressive for men, but it's still pretty oppressive for the men and so on.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say, reiterate that I do really appreciate this, like, your belief that you should have as many children as you possibly can, for whatever you believe the reason is, like why it is that you believe that's the right thing to do. Yes, yeah. It's an opinion based on sorry,
right?
Remind me. Anyway,
it's an opinion based on your interpretation of
facts, right?
Well, you're in turn based on facts.
Yes, thank you. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Oh. Anyway, yeah, we have some people who are culturally Hindu in the audience, as you guys know. I think there are different reasons why the unpopular message I'm sharing on this channel is more appealing to Hindus than any other demographic. I have several viewers now who are Spanish speakers in South America. Think about how hard it is to accept this for someone in Brazil or Colombia or what have you. But it was someone who is culturally Hindu comments that, yes, arranged marriage is huge among Hindus, even among the most highly educated people you will find. And I would say this, before I put emphasis on questioning, how would you enforce a law against that? I'm insinuating that probably it would look something like the re-education camps in Xinjiang. Like, I don't think the enforcement really would be sitting back and intercepting text messages and emails and then arresting the parents. Probably it would have to be something like the re-education camps in Xinjiang. But this is the thing I want to emphasize now. The people who practice arranged marriage, what do they believe in? It's not as simple as saying God. And by the way, there is no text you can pull out of the Bible on this. It's not like you can say, oh, well, look at the 10 commandments. Like commandment number 8 is therefore arrange a marriage. You know, they believe this is for the best, you know, but people can believe that. That can be something they believe is more real than an opinion, more real than an interpretation of fact, more real than a fact, right? It becomes a belief. I mean, again, some of you know what I'm talking about right away. Some of you don't. If you were around traditional racists from the American South, the segregated South of the United States of America, what they'd always say about relations between black people and white people is, oh, it's for the best. You know, it's for the best that they don't get to go to the same colleges we go to. It's for the and they really believe that. They really believe it's for the best.
Oh,
You know,
worse.
but how is it going to change? You know, how do you change someone's belief that's so nebulous, right? Like I hate to tell you this, there is a sense in which I can prove to you God doesn't exist. If we pin down your definition of God, you know what I mean? We can kind of prove that. Whether or not toothpaste works, like there are things we can prove, right? Whether or not the earth is flat or the earth is round, this susceptible to proof and falsifiability and definite knowledge and certainty, right? But that kind of belief, the belief that arranged marriages is for the best. And look, we can say the same thing all over again with cousin marriage. And again, I made videos with about people who think that marrying one person to their cousin, that's like for the family as a whole is for the best, right? So, you know, how do you overcome that? And yeah, very often for people who are in this struggle, it's not even clear what it is they're arguing you should or shouldn't believe in. Right. So here's a comment from Martin for you. And Martin's been here. I remember the name from several other live streams. So, quote, he or she says, I assume this is a man, but anyway, it could be Martina. We don't know. Quote, lies are functional and even good if they keep society functioning and avoiding its self-destruction. That's why atheism and nihilism shouldn't become mainstream or taken seriously by the majority of the population. So, you know, Martin, have you been to a Muslim majority country? I'm going to take an example of a Muslim country I have been to. I have been in. Would you live in Malaysia for just 2 weeks? And Malaysia is considered moderate in its form of Islam. Malaysia is not Saudi Arabia. Malaysia is not Afghanistan, right? Could you spend just 2 weeks in Malaysia and still believe what you've just said you believe? I don't think you could. I think after 2 weeks, you'd think it was intolerable. And you would completely recant and throw away this notion that, as you say, quote unquote, lies are functional and even good. All right. Now, we can extend this further. Could you spend 2 weeks in Afghanistan? Could you spend 2 weeks in Saudi Arabia? You know? And I've got to push a little bit further here. His phrasing is telling. He says, if they keep society functioning and avoiding its self-destruction. What if you lived in Malaysia for 2 years? What if you lived in Saudi Arabia for 2 years? What if you lived in Afghanistan for 2 years? At some point, don't you think you might start to feel that the truth is so important? The difference between truth and lies is so important that it would really be quite worthwhile for society to shut down, to stop functioning, that it would be a good thing for this particular society to self-destruct precisely so that it could make the transition from living a lie to some kind of more healthy engagement with the truth. Whether you regard that as destructive or creative is very much in the eye of the beholder. What one person would see as the destruction of Saudi Arabia, someone else would see as its salvation. A revolution that tears down the religious tyranny of Saudi Arabia, of Afghanistan, or even a more moderate Muslim country like Malaysia. Some people would see that as self-destruction. Right? Not me. The role of the nihilist and the role of the true atheist, in my opinion, as a dissident intellectual in society, is to perpetually work toward that great rectification. It's to work toward writing a new constitution, not just once and for all time, but in my opinion, in every generation, again and again, attacking, undermining, overcoming the myths, the lies that, as you say, keep society functioning, as I say, that perpetuate, society as you know it, right? Pointing the way, leading the way, whether creatively or destructively, toward the end of the darkness of the Dark Ages. The year is 2022. The Dark Ages are not over yet.